Chapter 1: The Golden Child and the Ghost. To understand why I walked out that night, you have to understand the house I grew up in. Love in the Bennett household was not a free resource, it was a ladder, and my younger sister, Harper, was born at the top. Harper was 2 years younger than me, a burst of bright blonde energy, constant laughter, and an innate ability to occupy every room she walked into. She was the child who could turn a mediocre finger painting into a family event. My parents, Richard and Carol, treated her like a fragile, precious artifact. If Harper sneezed, the house stopped. If Harper smiled, it was a holiday. I, on the other hand, was the shadow. I was quiet, observant, and naturally gifted with numbers and details. Because I didn't demand their attention, they assumed I didn't need it. I still remember the state math championship when I was 12. I had studied for 6 months, memorizing formulas until my eyes burned. The competition was held in a high school gymnasium in Columbia, 2 hours away. When my name was called for the first place trophy, I looked out into the bleachers. The seats I had reserved for my parents were empty. My mother, Carol, called me 3 hours later, her voice airy and unbothered. "Oh, Chloe, sweetheart, we are so sorry. Harper's dance recital ran over, and then she wanted to get ice cream to celebrate her participation ribbon. You understand, don't you? You're so independent." I held the heavy brass trophy in my lap on the bus ride home, staring out the window at the dark highway, repeating those words to myself, "You're so independent." It was a compliment they used as a shield to protect themselves from their own neglect. As we grew older, the roles solidified. I went to Clemson University, earned a dual degree in accounting and culinary arts, and worked 60 hours a week in a high-end French patisserie to pay off my student loans. Harper went to a liberal arts college, changed her major 4 times, and dropped out in her junior year because she felt spiritually restricted. To welcome her home, my parents gave her the title of creative director at Bennett's Hearth. Her job consisted of showing up at noon, taking photos of the pastries I had baked, posting them on Instagram with captions about mindful baking, and taking money from the cash register to buy designer clothes. Meanwhile, the bakery was dying. My parents were terrible business owners. My father bought top-of-the-line equipment we couldn't afford, and my mother, Carol, refused to raise prices because she wanted to remain the friendly neighborhood bakery. When they were 3 months behind on their commercial lease and facing a state tax lien that would have shut it down, they didn't go to Harper. They came to me. "Chloe, please," Carol had wept in my apartment, her hand clutching my arm. "If the bakery closes, your father's heart will break. You're the smart one. You have savings. Can't you just help us get through the winter?" I emptied my savings account, $45,000 that I had saved to buy my own bakery lease. I paid off the tax lien, restructured their vendor contracts, and took over their bookkeeping. I also agreed to bake for them full-time, working for a salary that was 40% below market rate. On top of that, I quietly set up a monthly automatic transfer of $1,000 from my personal checking account to their operating account to cover their loan interest. I did it because I thought that saving their dream would finally make me a part of the family. I thought that when they looked at the balanced books and the full display cases, they would see me. But they only saw Harper. At Sunday dinners, my father would pour wine and toast to Harper's brilliant marketing, pointing to a post that had gotten 1,000 likes, while ignoring the fact that the flour on his apron had been washed off by my sweat. Harper would lean back, sipping her Chardonnay, accepting the praise like she had earned it, occasionally offering me a patronizing smile. "You do a great job back in the kitchen, Chloe. Really keeps the rustic vibe alive." I stayed quiet. I smiled. I kept baking. I kept paying their bills. Until the night of my father's 60th birthday. Chapter 2: The Magnolia Room. The Magnolia Room was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Charleston, located in a restored 19th century townhouse. The air smelled of polished mahogany, expensive perfume, and jasmine. My parents had invited 20 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few of their wealthy friends from the country club. I had spent the entire morning at the bakery, producing 300 croissants for a corporate order before driving home, showering, and putting on a simple black dress. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing. Harper was at the center of the room, wearing a striking red silk dress that stood out against the muted colors of the restaurant. My mother, Carol, was adjusting Harper's hair, whispering how beautiful she looked. My father, Richard, was holding a glass of scotch, laughing loudly with his brother. I took a seat at the far end of the long table, next to my cousin Mark, who was busy scrolling through his phone. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked how the morning rush at the bakery had gone. Dinner was served, expensive plates of low-country cuisine, crab cakes, and prime rib. Throughout the meal, the conversation cycled endlessly around Harper. Harper is planning to expand our brand to Savannah, Carol announced proudly, gesturing with her fork. She has such a visionary mind. She's looking at historic properties right now. My Uncle Thomas looked down the table at me. Savannah? That's a big jump. Chloe, how do the numbers look for that? Can the King Street location support a second branch? Before I could answer, Richard waved a hand dismissively. Oh, Chloe just handles the taxes and the spreadsheets. She always worries about the pennies. Harper has the big picture. That's what matters in business. A few people laughed. Harper raised her glass to my father, her eyes shining with self-satisfaction. Numbers are easy to replace, Uncle Tom. Creative energy isn't. I felt a cold sensation slide down my throat. I set my fork down. The metal clinked against the plate, a sharp, clear sound. Actually, I said, my voice calm, cutting through the chatter. We can't support a second branch. In fact, if we don't cut our inventory costs by 20% and renegotiate the flour supplier contract by next month, the King Street store will default on its commercial loan. I've spent the last 3 weeks analyzing the margins. We are overstocked on specialty ingredients that Harper ordered for her Instagram videos, and they are rotting in the walk-in. The table went silent. Carol's smile tightened at the corners. Harper tilted her head, her expression changing from smugness to irritation. Chloe, Harper said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. Please don't bring your workplace anxiety to Dad's birthday dinner. We're trying to celebrate. Not everyone wants to listen to your boring spreadsheets. I'm not bringing anxiety, Harper. I'm bringing reality, I replied, looking directly at my father. The business is bleeding cash. If I stop the monthly cash injections. Carol interrupted, her voice sharp and warning. Chloe. That is enough. Let's not make a scene in front of our guests. Your sister has everything under control. Richard didn't even look at me. He just reached for his wine glass, stood up, and tapped his knife against the side. The clinking sound was loud, calling the room to order. He cleared his throat, his face flushed from the wine. I'd like to make a toast, he said, his voice booming across the restaurant. To 60 years of life, and to the future of the Bennett name. As we look ahead, Carol and I are so grateful for the blessing of our family. Especially for our youngest, Harper, who has poured her soul into our heritage. We always say, if we could have cloned Harper, we'd have $1 million franchise by now. Honestly, we wish she was our only daughter. He raised his glass. Carol nodded, her eyes shining. The guests began to clap and raise their glasses. Harper smirked, her eyes locking onto mine across the table, a slow, deliberate look of total victory. Something inside me didn't snap. It didn't explode. It simply went cold. It was the feeling of a heavy iron door shutting, locking out the noise, the warmth, the hope. I looked at my father. His eyes passed over me, not even pausing, as if I were a piece of the restaurant's furniture. I looked at my mother, Carol, who was clinking her glass with Harper's. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I folded my white linen napkin neatly, placing it next to my half-eaten plate. I didn't grab my coat. I just turned and walked out of the Magnolia room, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Behind me, the laughter resumed before the door could even swing shut. Chapter 3, Cutting the Cord. The drive back to my apartment was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the streetlights of downtown Charleston. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. When I got inside my apartment, I walked straight to my desk. I didn't turn on the lights, I just worked by the blue glow of my laptop screen. My hands were steady. For years, I had operated with the precision of a pastry chef, every gram of flour measured, every degree of heat controlled. I applied that same precision now. First, I logged into the bakery's accounting portal. I unlinked my personal bank account, stopping the automatic $1,000 monthly transfer that was scheduled to leave my account in 3 days. Next, I changed the administrative passwords to the payroll system, the tax filing accounts, and the vendor portals, changing the contact email to my father's personal address. I downloaded my personal spreadsheet templates, leaving only the raw, unorganized PDF statements from the last 6 months. Finally, I opened the family group chat. I typed a short message. I am done. I will no longer bake your bread, manage your staff, or cover your debts. Do not contact me unless it is to arrange the return of my personal baking equipment. Good luck. I hit send. Then, I turned my phone off. Not on silent, off. I placed it in a drawer in my hallway, went to my bedroom, and fell asleep. For the first time in 10 years, I slept past 3 in the morning. When I turned my phone back on at 9 a.m. the next morning, it nearly froze from the sheer volume of notifications. 40 missed calls. 26 text messages. 5 emails. I opened the voicemails. The first was from Carol, recorded at 4:30 a.m. Her voice was frantic, high-pitched. Chloe, where are you? The morning prep crew is here, but the dry storage keys are missing, and we don't have the recipe sheets for the weekend brioche order. The corporate client is picking up at 8 a.m. Call me immediately. The second was from Richard at 6 a.m., his tone angry and demanding. Chloe, this is childish. You walked out of my birthday dinner and now you're sabotaging the business. We have a queue of customers out the door and the display cases are half empty. Get down here right now. The third was from Harper at 7:30 a.m., her voice laced with panic beneath her usual attitude. Chloe, the flour delivery guy is here and is refusing to unload the shipment because he says our account is flagged for non-payment. What did you do to the accounts? Fix this now. I deleted the voicemails. I didn't reply to the texts. I got dressed, walked down the street to a small, independent coffee shop, and ordered a croissant and a black coffee. I sat by the window, watching the rain wash over the cobblestones. The croissant was mediocre, the butter was cheap, and the layers weren't laminated properly. I smiled. I knew exactly how to fix it. But it wasn't my job anymore. Chapter 4, The Sanctuary in Savannah. 2 days later, I drove south to Savannah. The highway was lined with ancient live oaks, their branches draped in long curtains of silvery Spanish moss that swayed in the breeze. The air felt warmer here, thicker with the scent of salt marsh and old brick. Great-aunt Evelyn lived in a historic 3-story townhouse on one of Savannah's famous squares. She was 82, with sharp blue eyes that saw through everything and a voice that carried the crisp authority of an old-school Southern matriarch. She had buried 2 husbands, run a successful real estate firm when women weren't allowed in boardrooms, and had long since stopped caring about family politics. She was sitting on her veranda, a glass of iced sweet tea in her hand, when I walked up the steps. She took one look at my face and set her glass down. You look like you've finally laid down a coffin you've been carrying for too long, she said, gesturing to the chair beside her. Sit down, Chloe. Tell me why you're not in Charleston baking bread. I sat down on the wicker chair, and for the next hour, I let the words spill out. I told her about the anniversary dinner, the toast, the sister who took the credit, and the parents who wished she was their only child. I showed her the texts Harper had sent, calling me a saboteur and accusing me of trying to ruin the family out of jealousy. Evelyn listened, her face unreadable, her eyes fixed on the moss hanging from the oak trees in the square. When I finished, she let out a long, quiet breath. Your father, Richard, was always a weak man, she said, her voice steady and cool. He married Carol, a woman who preferred appearances to substance, and together they raised a girl who is nothing but smoke and mirrors. But you are my brother's granddaughter. You have the Bennett grit. She stood up, her cane clicking on the wooden deck, and walked inside. A minute later, she returned with a leather portfolio and laid it in my lap. Do you know who owns the building Bennett's hearth operates out of, Chloe? I blinked. I thought they leased it from a firm called EV Properties. Evelyn smiled, a sharp, elegant smile. They do. I established EV Properties 40 years ago. I own that building, child. For 15 years, I have charged Richard less than a third of the market rent because I believed he was building a legacy for you. I thought my brother's granddaughter would inherit the fruits of that soil. She tapped the leather portfolio with her finger. I am changing my estate plans. I am transferring the deed of the King Street property to you today, as a living gift. Along with the family trust fund my brother left. You are now the sole owner of that building. You are your parents' landlord. I stared at the documents, my chest tightening. Aunt Evelyn, if I take this, and they can't pay. They won't pay, Evelyn interrupted, her eyes cold as flint. Because they don't know how to work. They've lived off your sweat for 10 years. It's time for them to learn the price of the roof over their heads. If they want Harper to be their only child, let Harper pay the lease. That afternoon, we sat in her lawyer's office in downtown Savannah. The paperwork was signed, the deeds were recorded, and the keys to the King Street property were placed in my hand. I wasn't just free. I held the keys to their kingdom. Chapter 5. The Rot Inside the Hearth. The decay of Bennett's hearth was fast, like a house built on wet sand. Without my recipes and my management, the kitchen fell into chaos. The morning bakers, who had stayed for years because I treated them with respect and managed their schedules, began to quit. Harper tried to step into the kitchen, but she didn't know how to calibrate the humidity for the sourdough or scale the yeast for the brioche. Within 2 weeks, they switched to buying pre-made, frozen pastry dough from a commercial food distributor. The change was immediate. The beautiful, golden, laminated croissants that had been featured in local magazines were replaced by greasy, deflated pastries that tasted of preservative chemicals. The sourdough was dense and sour in the wrong way. The local food bloggers, who Harper had spent months courting, began to write scathing reviews. Bennett's hearth has lost its soul. The pastries taste like cardboard. A tragic end to a Charleston classic. But the financial rot was even worse. Since I had unlinked my account, the automatic transfer was cancelled. The bank attempted to draft the monthly interest payment of $2,800 for the commercial equipment loan. The transaction failed. The bank sent a formal warning letter, which Richard ignored, assuming it was a mistake. At the same time, the flour distributor refused to deliver without cash upfront, because I was no longer there to manage the credit line. To pay the distributor, Richard had to withdraw cash from the employee tax withholding account. 10 days after I returned from Savannah, the rent for the King Street building was due. I didn't call Carol. I didn't text Richard. I instructed my lawyer in Charleston to handle it as a standard commercial transaction. When the payment didn't arrive by 5 p.m. on the due date, my lawyer sent a formal 3-day pay or quit notice to the bakery. Chapter 6. The Landlord's Knock. It was raining again when the knock came. I was in my kitchen, test baking a batch of lemon tarragon tarts, the smell of sweet citrus filling the apartment. I opened the door. Carol stood in the hallway. Her expensive linen coat was soaked, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her face was red, her eyes wild with a mixture of anger and panic. Richard stood behind her, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. My mother shoved a piece of paper in front of my face. "What is this, Chloe? What is this sick game you're playing?" Carol screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "We received an eviction warning from EV Properties. They say we have 3 days to vacate the building. Who did you complain to? Did you talk to Evelyn?" I didn't back down. I stood in the doorway, my apron covered in flour, my voice flat and calm. "I didn't complain to anyone, Mom. I own EV Properties. Aunt Evelyn transferred the building deed to me last week. You owe $4,500 in back rent. And if you don't pay it by Friday at 5, I will file the eviction papers with the sheriff." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. You own the building? Chloe, we are your parents. You can't throw us onto the street. You built the business on my back, Dad, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. I spent 10 years in that kitchen. I paid off your tax lien with my own savings. I wired you $1,000 a month just to keep the bank from taking your equipment. And how did you pay me back? By telling 20 people at a restaurant that you wished Harper was your only child. It was a toast, Chloe, Carol cried, her voice turning high and desperate. It was just a light-hearted comment to make your sister feel good. You know how sensitive she is. We didn't mean anything by it. No, you did mean it, I replied. You meant it because you've lived it my whole life. You wanted Harper to be your only child because she's easy to love. She doesn't ask you to look at your own failures. She just smiles and takes the photos. Well, now you have her. Let her bake the bread. Let her negotiate with the bank. Let her pay the rent. Richard stepped forward, his eyes wet. Chloe, please. The bank is already foreclosing on the equipment loan. If you evict us, we lose the lease, the bank takes the ovens, and they will foreclose on our house. We will lose everything. We'll be ruined. I looked at him, the man who had stood at the head of the table, basking in the spotlight, pretending he was a self-made patriarch while his eldest daughter worked herself to the bone in the dark. You should have thought about the foundation before you toasted the roof, Dad, I said softly. I closed the door. Carol began to pound on the wood, screaming my name, but I didn't answer. I walked back into my kitchen, took the lemon tarragon tarts out of the oven, and set them on the wire rack to cool. The tarts were perfect. The crust was flaky, the filling smooth and bright. I sat down at my table, took a bite, and let the quiet wash over me. Chapter 7, A New Batch, A New Life. My parents couldn't raise the rent money. Within a month, the eviction was finalized. The sheriff posted the lockout notice on the doors of Bennett's hearth. The bank seized the equipment, and because my parents had used their home as collateral, they were forced to sell their suburban house to settle the remaining debt. The fall was quiet, but absolute. Richard took a job managing a commercial bakery department at a regional grocery store chain, working the night shift, the same shift he had once mocked me for working. Carol moved into a small, rented 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of town, selling her designer bags and costume jewelry online to pay their utilities. Harper's fall was the most public. Once the bakery closed, the former staff members began to comment on her social media posts, exposing the truth. They posted screenshots of my bank transfers, revealing that I had been the one paying their salaries while Harper took photos on the beach. Her followers vanished, and she was forced to take a job as a retail associate at a department store mall, folding clothes for minimum wage. Her bright red lipstick was replaced by a tired, forced customer service smile. But I didn't leave King Street. With Aunt Evelyn's trust fund and my ownership of the building, I gutted the space. I removed the cheap laminate counters Richard had installed and uncovered the original, historic red brick walls. I bought state-of-the-line European deck ovens and built a long, beautiful marble counter where customers could watch the pastry chefs at work. 2 months ago, I opened my own patisserie in the exact same location. The name on the historic glass window is Evelyn and Chloe. We don't buy frozen dough. We bake everything from scratch, using local organic flour, seasonal fruits from South Carolina farmers, and natural wild yeast. I hire young, talented bakers who have been overlooked by corporate kitchens, paying them a living wage and giving them creative control over the menu. On our opening day, the line of customers stretched down King Street and around the corner. Aunt Evelyn sat at the best table in the corner, her silver cane resting against the wall, sipping tea and smiling at the crowd. Sometimes, at the end of the day, when the flour has settled and the ovens are cooling down, I stand on the sidewalk outside the shop, looking up at the historic brick building. I remember the little girl who won the math trophy and rode the bus alone. I remember the woman who sat at the end of the table while her family wished she didn't exist. But the memory doesn't hurt anymore. It is just a story about someone I used to be. They got the life they wanted, the silence they wished for. And I got my time back. I built a home out of peace, not approval. And I learned that the most important thing you can ever build is your own exit. If you have ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you, and you believe that walking away is the start of your power, leave one word in the comments below. Worth.